Hi guys, since my pirate software video is doing well, I figured I'd do one on Mutahar as well. It'd also be hypocritical if I didn't. I will only be speaking to the cybersecurity claims, not anything else that has been mentioned about him. So there will be 3 parts to this video. 1, his past claims. 2, a debunking of his expertise in a more recent video. And 3, the philosophical question of being an authority and who you can watch instead. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to roll a clip and comment on that. So obviously I'll be using the Condor's video for the majority of this, and also harmful opinions as well. So if you haven't seen those videos for some reason, go check them out because that'll give you more context. Okay, so here's the timeline that we're going to pretty much be basing everything off of. I'm going to keep it main screen and I'm going to roll this next clip. Hopefully it's not super janky, but that way you can kind of get a good time reference on where this all lands. I'm going to let the whole clip roll and then I'm going to discuss what I think after.
You complain that the tidbits we'll be trolling through today are 10 years old. I'd like to remind you that that's still more recent than the pirate software-esque high school Nepo daycare Mutahar apparently still uses to big himself up as being a professional engineer with.
I was basically finishing up my, high school diploma and everything. And at the time, I worked a little computer programming job. I worked as a pen tester, you know what I mean? Like, I got into the whole thing early. I had a couple connections.
Or perhaps his claims of being an engineer come from the job he quit in 2013 to pursue film when he was 18 or 19, which is presumably the awful bank app programming job you may have heard him mention.
So, for me, I left that job. I left I left all that kind of stuff. I left a soulless career. And I jumped onto film and TV.
Then again, maybe none of this is where his claims of being an engineer come from, because back then, he called the career path that of a blue-collar computer programmer. Did you know that he didn't actually start calling himself specifically an engineer until over a year after he stopped studying to become one and started pursuing film instead? As far as I can tell from public record, it's only in 2015 that he switched from saying he was a programmer to saying he was an engineer. At first a dead-end computer engineer, but over time, somehow, for some reason, it morphed into a source of pride and, more importantly, credibility, and he clearly became very attached to the title.
I'm an engineer. I'm a fucking engineer.
I'm a goddamn engineer. I'm an engineer.
I'm a fucking engineer. I'm an engineer.
I'm only an engineer. Oh, I'm an engineer.
I'm an engineer.
I'm just an engineer.
I'm an engineer.
I'm just a fucking engineer.
I'm a goddamn engineer.
I'm a fucking engineer.
I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer.
As an engineer, being an engineer, I have to tell you as an engineer. I'm just a dumb engineer as an engineer. My engineer asked, but as an engineer, so I'm just a fucking dumb fucking engineer. Okay, I can tell you, I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer. As an engineer, I'm an engineer. As somebody that is an engineer, as an engineer. I'm saying I'm the number one engineer as an engineer. As an engineer. Right? As an engineer, I'm just an engineer. Speaking of somebody that is an engineer, I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer.
It would seem that the further he gets from being an engineer, the more of an engineer he becomes. To agree with Nick Andros that it looks very strange. It looks even stranger though, if you happen to be aware that in 2014 he made a video where he claims to have worked in video editing, film and TV for 4 years.
While I do have a good time, I do end up working constantly. So for 4 years, I have been pretty much working the whole same job. And
that job, 4 years, 2014. So you were doing that since 2010, 2 years before you normally tell us you started to get interested in editing to begin with. I'll put this one down to him having a stroke or something.
So we are to believe that he was a pen tester in high school, but he also says that he's a programmer, and he also says that he was making a bank app during this time.
Muta used his claim to be an engineer to pose as an expert while advertising for Intel.
I myself used to be an engineer before I went into the video editing route. Now, as an engineer, I played around with the latest PC parts.
Not only does he claim he was an engineer, he specifically states that his work as an engineer involved playing around with the latest PC parts. To big up Intel, the company that's sponsoring this video, he claimed to have direct expertise with parts like this. The 2 jobs I'm aware of him claiming to have had before he started YouTube were the high school penetration testing one and programming bank applications.
I told you guys, I'm a guy who used to code bank applications. Really boring shit.
Which one of those involved playing around with the latest processors and graphics cards? Oh, do you mean you did that in your own time while you were an engineer? But Muta, you like to brag about how little tech you had back then.
I was editing stuff on this laptop.
Claiming that pen testing is a dead end also seems pretty nonsensical. That's not a field that is dead end, so to speak. Dead end job would be somewhat accurate for a programmer, but honestly, who's hiring high schoolers? Like, what claim are we to believe that you have experience in all these fields? Because all of these fields have huge barriers to entry to even start around this time. Even with the time that you have as a high schooler, I just don't buy this claim. It's entirely possible to learn this stuff in high school, but maybe like one field, not all three. That's a crazy claim. And the fact that he uses all these terms interchangeably for the same role is also pretty suspect, because these are all three different fields, and maybe the programming and pen testing stuff you lump together, you as the viewer, but their job responsibilities are pretty different. You do some programming and pen testing, right? But that's not all you're doing. To me, with his connection claims that he says in that clip, this sounds like either a family member or a family friend had a business and they needed an app that he somehow tacked on pen testing. Who pen tests their own app? You have to hire someone third party. How are you going to spot your own vulnerabilities when you're the person that made the app? Do you need outside people to verify that? Also, in the IT field, I've never heard of an official job title being a computer engineer. We have IT engineers, but computer engineers aren't in IT. They're the guys that create the circuit boards for computers. Like, they design it from the ground up. Also, we don't ever really get the latest and greatest tech. I guess unless maybe you're in a startup that has a shit ton of money or something. But the most that we get are just the advanced versions of computers, because we usually have like some sort of standard, and that's it. No company is going to justify spending that much money on IT, a field that most companies already hate throwing money at because we don't make the money. We cannot justify like having a 5090 in our rigs because we don't even use graphics card. Like, even as a programmer, even as a pen tester, you don't use it. That honor goes to designers and CAD engineers and all that shit. Does Muta have certs for any of this? If someone had this knowledge, I would guarantee that they would go and get that corresponding certificate in order to be legitimate in this field. But instead, he pivoted over to editing. To me, this just kind of screams a lack of integrity in this person. And the fact that his apology video did not address any of this and didn't clear anything up tells me everything I need to know about Mutahar. I would be coming out swinging, proving my worth, as I take pride in this job. I love this job. Also, the fact that he's been privating videos and erasing the word engineers from his comments is already telling. I also want to point out that the issue with all this is, if this is the only experience that he's ever had in his job and he's constantly referencing it, then already by default, that's a lack of integrity and leads me to think that he's a total fraud, because you can't just claim that off of this like one job that you had and then you're an editor the rest of your life. So let's talk about the Sharepoint cyber attack video. Firstly, it's obvious that he's reading most of this stuff, which is fine. Honestly, this is kind of a nitpick, but if you're going to spoon feed me, I think you should really have a good idea of what you're talking about, especially with your supposed cybersecurity credentials and your computer engineer credentials. So as you'll see, breaking this down further kind of enhances my skepticism of how much he actually knows about this stuff. So let's roll a little bit of this video.
You send a post request to the endpoint of that on-premise SharePoint server. And that code could look something similar.
So here's my first problem, right? If you're explaining this to, like, in layman's terms to a normie audience, I think most people are going to have a question on what the hell is a post request. And that's something that you should really keep in mind as someone that explains or even just talks about this stuff just for entertainment. And this is like a simple concept, right? Just tell everyone what it is, and I'll share it right here, right? So basically, a post request is an HTTP request that, whatever application you're working on is sending data to, like a website. So that's all it is. The opposite of that would be a GET request, which is requesting data from the web server. So this is something that Python will use as well. As you can see here, you just import the library and then you give it whatever data it needs, and then you can send data that way. All this to say is that this attack utilizes sending data to the server to attack it. Let's move on. So here he's going to talk a bit about the code behind the exploit. So let's watch and see.
So they, again, have entire sections where they check if the toolpane ASPX is accessible. They send a malicious web part payload to toolpane.aspix. Okay, so you can see layout, 15 toolpane aspix, display edit, and yada, yada, yada. But yeah, it's pretty bad.
this guy is supposed to be a programmer. He's supposed to be a computer engineer, and he just barely touches on the code, and all he's doing is just reading the comments in this code. Here's the link for it in case you want to look at it yourself. And this person, Sultan Ali Zero, has actually changed this code. So I had to go back in the history to look at the past commitments. So I had to go back to the first version of this. So here's what he's doing. These are just comments, right? He's just reading this, and he doesn't actually dive into the actual code itself, right? Like I can tell you right off the bat, this is the URL that he talks about earlier in the video. The one that actually sends the payload. This is just assigning it there, and then it's just spoofing the web browser itself, so it doesn't throw any red flags. Like it's gonna think that this is a legitimate request coming from a legitimate PC. And then he barely just goes over the first two functions, right? Like these are just functions. This gets called later in the Python script, right? So all it's doing is, hey, this is the request that we saw in the Python example over here, right? This is how you call it in Python. So right here, right? And it's the same thing here, call it, and then that has the inbuilt function in requests, and then you feed it the URL. It's probably a timeout of 10 seconds. You don't want to verify if it exists. And then proxies. This is getting the argument from up here. And all this does, right? This is just a function that when you call it, you have to give it the base URL and you have to give it the proxies. Now, this is already defined here, so you probably don't need to feed that. But then here's the send exploit thing here as well, right? And again, sending the exploit, you know, this looks like it's just feeding it the URL. So that's all it's doing. Here's the function here, send exploit, right? Here's that URL again, and the actual data that we're going to be sending to this exploit is defined here. This is the data that probably bypasses the authentication steps, right? So I can't, I don't know enough to really explain this portion, but I know just reading this is the data that we send. Now we're moving up, and we're going to try to post all these arguments here, right? So we want the target URL from earlier. We're checking the code to make sure like it's not returning whatever it was up there. And then we're just printing this out in the terminal. And then if there's an exception, then we just throw out an exception. And down here is where we actually are doing the actual code. We're calling everything in this function here, right? And like I said earlier, here is check tool pane right here. Here is send exploit, and you can see we feed it the target, we feed it the proxies argument. This is how we should be breaking this down. Not like, hey, I'm going in here and I'm gonna read the fucking comment right here. This doesn't tell me anything about this exploit, especially like if it's an entertainment aspect. Like, how is this entertaining? Just reading the comment here and just explaining literally the first two functions in the fucking thing, when the actual like payload is down here and then the actual function itself is down here. And like, I'm not even a coding major. I didn't graduate with bachelor's. This is stuff that I learned that in the few classes that I took at school, and working on it myself professionally and just as a hobby. Like, this should be a no-brainer to Mutahar, but this just kind of proves to me that he's just glossing over important shit like that. I also want to talk about this section that he kind of glosses over here, and it's probably because he doesn't know a lot about Sharepoint. So this line here that says, it's a dream for ransomware operators. Why is that such a dream, right? Like, why ransomware specifically? And that's because Sharepoint is not just your internal websites. It's not like your intranet, right? It's not, you know, company.com, and then that's where you post your announcements, you know, and events and all that stuff. Typically, Sharepoint also stores your team's channels data in there. So if you guys are in accounting and you have a Teams chat for accounting and you guys upload files in there, and that's how you guys share files, that's getting stored in Sharepoint. If you guys have OneDrive stores your files in Sharepoint under your personal site. And just to be clear, I haven't worked with Sharepoint offline. I've always worked with Sharepoint that's online. Assuming that this all stores in offline Sharepoint right? If you have an on-premise SharePoint server and you're storing everything in there, which would most likely be the case, because if you're, I don't know, somebody like the FBI, you're not trying to store your data up in Microsoft servers. You want it all local. Then all your data is now up for grabs from ransomware people. And that's that's like easy money for them. Ransomware hackers are usually bottom of the totem pole people. Like they buy axes usually just to run ransomware because it's free money. You just throw that shit on there, you encrypt everything, and then wait for your payout. But it's also more scary because aside from the remote code execution possibilities, you can also face data exfiltration. So that's freaking huge. And like we just kind of gloss over this point. And I feel like if you had any shred of credibility, you would also bring this up. Like it's like it seems like a big nothing burger, but it's actually pretty big. So now we're at the third portion of this video. And with that, I have two questions for you. At what point do we consider somebody an authority? And second question, he did this so long ago. How can he call himself an engineer anymore? So let's talk about the second question for a moment. So if I work on my car, does that make me a mechanic? It depends on what point you would consider that, right? At best, me personally, I don't think I would compare myself to a professional mechanic unless I had the years of experience to back it up, or if I had like a bunch of ASE certs, right? But to address the question itself, if I was a salesman 10 years ago and I'm doing YouTube now, can I still claim that I was a salesman and I can be that appeal to authority figure? Can I still claim that I'm an expert salesman and you should listen to what I say? How about if I told you that I was only a salesman for 1 year? If you kind of dismiss that point based off of what I just said, then I kind of think we have our answer. And that really brings up the point of the first question that we kind of need to discuss here. So let me just bring up a video from 2015 that he talks about with the deep web stuff. And again, 2015 is kind of around the earliest time that I see that he uploads videos about exploring the dark. Now, this video is accurate. There's nothing in there that I disagree with him about. The thing is, though, is that none of this stuff is pen tester related. And now that sounds weird, right? Because, he's talking about the deep web stuff. Isn't that hacker stuff? No, not really. He's really more talking about defense in this video, protecting yourself. The deep web stuff was never elite knowledge that you needed to ever explore. You just needed to know how to protect yourself on there. And that brings me to my next question. Is he a pen tester? No, I highly doubt that. I just think that he's a cyber enthusiast at this point. But I don't think he's an engineer in any capacity. I don't think he has any right to call himself an authority in this. And the fact that he has used it in previous videos, possibly winning arguments via appeal to authority, makes any of those videos null and void in my eyes. And again, I feel like he's just somebody that is a cyber enthusiast and has general knowledge about cyber enthusiasts. And I'll play an example here.
Claiming that people have learned from his content is an incredibly low bar and not something that was contested in the first place. If you like to use the brush tools in Photoshop, did you know that by holding down Alt and right-click, you can move your mouse to change the size and the hardness of your brush? Congratulations! Thousands of Photoshop users watching this video just rushed to open the software in order to try that trick. People have learned from this video, but I don't need to call myself a graphic design engineer or someone working in TV and film to wow an audience. If I made content that I believed stood up on its own, I wouldn't have to inflate my credentials.
Also, to follow this up, it's like if you have your buddy that claims that he's a mechanic, right? He knows everything there is to know about the car. He knows the exact paint color code that's used for the car. He knows what the VIN numbers start with. He knows based on certain stamps where that car was put together from and what factory located where. He knows what wheels come in which trim, stuff like that. But then when you ask him for some help to like change oil or, change spark plugs or change your air filter or actually start doing more in-depth engine work where you have to pull the head or something, then he's nowhere to be found. I feel like this is exactly the case for Muta, at the very least, considering his pen tester claims. I don't, and especially the way that he reviewed that code. I think any programmer worth their salt would have at least looked at it and tried to explain what's going on with it. And he just goes in there and reads the comments. And I feel like this is exactly the case here. I don't think he's an appeal to authority figure about cybersecurity stuff. Now, you can hand wave this whole situation away, and that's fine. Personally, I feel like somebody lying about their credentials, a la Pirate Software, has more things to hide and generally are telltale signs of a person that is not to be trusted and is very disingenuous. However, the real reason to dislike this guy is how he tried to hide the whole Nux situation involving Lolly and all that. That's some weirdo shit. I don't play with that bullshit. And Muta's a freaking weirdo for fucking doing that. And that's why I don't watch him. And that's why you shouldn't watch him either. He should not have a platform based off of this. So what are the alternatives? If you want cybersecurity related topics, I would defer to the experts of this field. You can watch John Hammond. He actually works with Huntress. Huntress is an excellent security product. So totally recommend you watch John Hammond. Low Level is also somebody that does excellent breakdowns and actually dives into the code for a lot of the hacks. The few times that I've watched him, he's been great. I do get lost in the sauce though. But if you're really enthusiastic and you really are interested in this stuff, go watch him. If you just want topics just about general computer stuff, general hacking, and like entertainment stuff, just, loosely going over stuff, I would strongly recommend Mental Outlaw. And I actually do believe he works in cybersecurity. So definitely check him out if you haven't already. And I'm also thinking about talking about topics like this. It's always been interesting to me, and IT is a field that I'm currently still in. So, hey, maybe throw me a sub and you'll like what you see. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope I don't have to do another one of these videos. I hope people are learning their lessons and not claiming that they're people that they're not. So hopefully I just go back to business as usual. And for those of you that have subbed, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. And I hope you have a good day.
When people start hitting that subscriber mark, you start to see them fucking think a little for a second. You're like, you know what? I'm hot fucking shit. Overtly popular. When you start to get a little bit of fucking popularity, please don't let it overtake you. Because you're not overtly popular. Let me tell you that. We're people just try to have fun. And if somebody criticizes you, dude, take it on the fucking chin and deal with it.